to the Betmaker Show. This is the NFL head coaching props analysis and preview for Wednesday, January 24th, 2020. And now, live from Las Vegas, the host of the Betmaker Show, Brian Blessing.
All right, folks, always a fun topic, NFL, and Brian Blessing and Bruce Marshall hanging in Las Vegas. Bruce from the Gold Sheet. And we're thinking, Bruce, football. We get the news actually this morning or late last night. Baseball's coming back. We know hockey's full steam ahead. The NBA is actually the sketchy one now, but football's the one with time kind of on their side.
Yes, and there's still, I mean, the Corona stuff could still rise up here, and even MLB, they finally agreed, which they could have done. What they ended up agreeing to, they could have done a good while back. They're all still a little bit vulnerable to the Corona stuff, but I think in a flare up of that, but it's looking a little bit better right now. At least one of these major sports is coming back, and short of a Corona outbreak, a new one. That's got to be a positive news for the sports community here. But like you say, Brian, the NFL has always timed this thing inadvertently, but it worked out to its favor the whole way through, because the worst of this hit right as soon as the NFL hit into its off season. And as we know, the NFL is planning to go ahead as usual, or as close to usual as it can, with the seats in the stadium. That's the other issue, but at least odds are looking like they will play. Though I still think we have to wait for another month or so to get something totally official, but it is looking more encouraging.
So let's have a little fun and go off the board a little bit. We talked about the Coach of the Year odds in a recent podcast. Let's go the other way and talk about coaches that are on the hot seat. And I think there's like a 1-9 favorite with my perusal of this. I know one you're going to throw in, but I think Doug Marrone better have an asbestos suit on.
Yes, Doug Marrone is most in trouble here. And a lot of people, and we talked about this through the fall last year, Brian, especially when the Jags had that disastrous run after midseason last year. And they were not only losing, they were getting hammered. They had that 5-game losing streak where they lost by almost 20 points per game. And everybody assumed Marrone would be gone then. However, I guess this speaks to how polarizing Tom Coughlin was. And then they had the grievance issue with the NFLPA, and that came to light. And it with the Jags responsible for like 25% of all the grievances in the league, and this all went back to Coughlin. Shad Khan, the owner with the mustache, decided at that point keeping Coughlin for another day was untenable. So he was actually dismissed as team president a little bit before the season ended there in mid-December. We all thought that Marrone and Dave Caldwell, the GM, were going to be out as well. But Shad Khan decided to give these guys one more chance. Now, so they enter the season really on the hottest seat. I think both of those two, both for the GM and the head coach. The fact the Jags have not gone out and done something a little more proactive, or been a little bit more proactive in finding a quarterback for themselves. They've sent Nick Foles out to the Bears for draft picks, which might end up helping. But the quarterback thing now is basically on Gardner Minshew's shoulders, unless they bring Cam Newton in. And that's still a thought that a lot of people have, that maybe this still might be a spot where Cam comes out. There's also whisperings that maybe the Jags are sort of, well, they were saying the same things about the Dolphins last year. They want to lose, they want to tank. And Dolphins case, tank for Tua. Well, they ended up getting Tua anyway, even though they didn't have to tank for him. Trevor Lawrence's name is coming up. He is almost assuredly going to come out after this season out of Clemson. He'd be the first quarterback pick. At least that's how it would look right now. And a lot of people think that's where he will land in Jacksonville. But if Jacksonville goes 3-13 this year, how does that figure to help Marrone and Caldwell? I don't know. It just doesn't look good for those two. And I think Marrone is definitely top on the hot seat list.
All right, he's on the top. I'm only going about 4 deep here. Number 2 to me, I think you'd have to take a long, hard look at Dan Quinn with the Falcons. he saved his job. Everybody thought he was going to get lit up during the bye last year. And this team really responded after the bye and were very competitive. Lots of talent there. The season was long since over, so they were kind of playing loose as a goose, but they were very competitive at the end of the year. So, Quinn justified sticking around after the bye and gets him another kick at it this year. But I would think Arthur Blank would have a very short leash here if they stumble out of the gate.
Yes, I don't think the season couldn't sequence the same way for the Falcons this year and Quinn last until the end, like happened in 2019. And we talked about this last year, Brian, you mentioned it. At the bye week, I thought it was maybe better than a 50-50 chance he wouldn't last through the bye week. He was basically given, I think, one more chance out of the bye, and the Falcons played really well. They won that game against the Saints. They finally discovered a pass rush in that game. And down the stretch, they were winning games. They won a game at San Francisco in exciting fashion. They beat some good teams, and they looked good. So all of a sudden, he gets a reprieve there, and we'll get one more shot. But it's 2 years running now. The Falcons have missed the playoffs. They still have some of the core there from the Super Bowl team a few years ago, and they made some interesting additions in the offseason there, Todd Gurley among them. But Ryan is still there at quarterback. Julio Jones is still there. And I think they're an interesting team here. And at some point we might get back to season wins. But I think this total for Atlanta has been suppressed a little bit, the 7.5, because of Tampa Bay. And in the same division, Tampa Bay's taken up a lot of the oxygen. But a lot of people think Atlanta might be the better team than Tampa Bay. At least some people think that. So, but all that does is put enormous pressure on Quinn. Like you say, he's got to win. He's got to get to the playoffs. If in this case, it really is playoffs or bust. Yeah. And if it looks like they're not going to make the playoffs, I don't think Quinn makes the finish line. But he's got one more chance here with Arthur Blank.
And number 3, I think we'll go to your backyard, bud. Your Broncos with Vic Fangio, and we'll see what kind of progression they make here. Clearly, in the draft, looks like they had a good draft. They were 7-9 last year, with the Chiefs a runaway winner at 12-4 in the AFC West. But there were some squirrely things that went on with the Broncos.
Yeah, and that's 7-9. I mean, they won 4 of their last 5. They were sitting 3-8 into December, and they made the switch to Drew Lock. Now they won 4 of 5, although 3 of those were hair-raising fashion and against teams that were struggling, like the Chargers and the Raiders. A game the Broncos almost kicked away. They beat a Detroit team that was really headed south with, and we'll get to Detroit in a second. But with all the quarterback issues, they really only played one good game, and that was the game against Houston, which was a good win. And it was Locke, as we mentioned. I think Fangio, though, is there's several things going on in Denver. One, the Broncos are now on a 3-year sub 500 streak. I mean, that's the first time since 70 through 72, the Broncos, and that covers the end of the Lou Saban and start of the John Ralston regimes, that the Broncos have had 3 losing years in a row. They got used to winning there. The place is a real fishbowl, and when you lose, it's high pressure. Vance Joseph found that out. He lasted for 2 years, and he's responsible for 2 of these 3 years. But Fangio improvement has been incremental at most. A lot is resting on Drew Lock here. And was that little audition in December last year, and admittedly they were winning, although not always that impressively, but winning, is that enough to suggest they're ready to make the next jump up? I think the best thing Fangio did in the offseason was switch offensive coordinators. Rich Scangarello, who came in from the 49ers last year, was obviously not up to the task. And so Fangio went out, and you talk about an old retreads, I guess, in his staff. This is the oldest staff in the league, I think. Pat Shurmur, who has been around the block a few times, is now, and most recently, Giants head coach. He's the new offensive coordinator. The thought is he will at least get the offense looking more like an NFL offense that Scangarello did. They've also added Melvin Gordon in the backfield, and these receivers, including some of the rookies, Judy from Alabama in particular, Hamler, Penn State. So it looks like they've got some pieces around Locke, and it is still acknowledged as a playoff quality defense. So there's one other factor here. John Elway is under the gun here too. There is an ownership situation brewing in Denver there with the heirs of Pat Bowlen really fighting it out. And a lot of people want, and the trustees who own the team, the leadership there's a real vacuum, and there's a lot of people in Denver want the team sold. In that case, Fangio would be on notice immediately if that happened. But I think that probably wouldn't transpire until the end of the year. Whatever. Fangio, probably, maybe not quite as much as Quinn, but close to it. Denver fans are sick of losing, and they have a short leash.
It's funny just looking him up. I'm from Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania, and we're a little long in the tooth, Bruce. And you'll remember these days, now it's like Florida, California, Texas are where the real studs seem to come from. And in those days, Ohio and Pennsylvania, you had the Big 33 game when the two states, the all-star teams in high school, and literally those would end up being great college teams, and those kids would go on to be in the pros. But it's funny, you just think of the pedigree. He's from Dunmore, Pennsylvania. Mike Munchak is from Scranton. Walt Michaels was from Wilkes-Barre. There's a real rich history, especially in that era. He was born in 1958, but that neck of the woods, boy, produced a lot of good people.
Yeah, it did, and there's a long history there, and coaches Pennsylvania and Ohio for sure. But there is a sort of a throwback element to the Broncos staff here. So John Elway, he went against type there, which a lot of the newer coaches hired, like some of the guys this offseason, Stefanski, Judge, young guys, young assistants coming up. And Elway went completely the other way with an older guy who gets his first shot. Sometimes that works out. We mixed evidence with Fangio, but we know that he knows defense inside net. But I think that the hire of Shermer, to me, that was the most important thing he did in the offseason, because they just weren't NFL caliber on offense last year because of design. And I think at least Shermer might alleviate that somewhat. We'll see.
And maybe we were off the mark a little bit in terms of the rankings. This Belichick coaching tree, jury's still way out on that. You look at the Bill Walsh coaching tree. I think you can even say the Andy Reid coaching tree has gone ahead of the Belichick coaching tree. But you go to Matt Patricia with the Lions, 6-10 year one, 3-12-1 last year. I think he could be very much on a hot seat. The funny thing is, I think the Lions are potentially one of those worst to first, or at least a big turnaround team. I can't get away from the first 5-6 weeks of last year, Bruce. They looked really good. I mean, they looked like a contender to win the division. They squandered games against really good teams, KC, San Fran specifically, and then Stafford got hurt. But Patricia better come out of the gate good here.
Yeah, and I think I actually think he's in a little bit more of a hot seat than Fangio.
I thought we were. I skipped a beat there. Should have been Patricia ahead of him.
Yeah, Fangio could be there too, but no, I think Patricia definitely is. A lot of people thought maybe after last year, it ended up he got a mulligan because of the quarterback thing, and he probably should have gotten a mulligan because let's face it, where they were at down the stretch last year. David Blau, the free agent rookie from Purdue, who had spent preseason camp with the Browns. And then he was sort of an afterthought last year. But after Stafford and then Driscoll got hurt, when you're down to your third quarterback for almost close to half the season, I think all bets should be off as far as firing a coach unless there's other things going on. And like you said, the Lions looked pretty competitive the first month and a half last year when Stafford was there. Nonetheless, he's got to start turning it around, and the track record of Belichick's assistants really not that good. And down the list here, from Romeo Crennel to Charlie Weiss to Josh McDaniels to that ill-fated run that he had in Denver, Eric Mangini. I guess you could call O'Brien.
He's next.
He's next
on the list here.
But he's a Belichick disciple too. So maybe he's sort of the exception, or maybe not. But I think the Patricia definitely. The other thing, we talking about this off air. There's a change at the top. Lions hierarchy there. Mrs. Ford, Martha Ford, 94 years old, but still sharp as a whip there, has turned things over the operations end over to her son. Now, remember, her daughter, I'm sorry, she had taken the reins away from her son a few years ago, and she was the one who wielded her axe indiscriminately there. Jim Caldwell and Mayhew, and they moved some guys out, front office and coach, almost immediately once she took over. So Patricia is actually working for a new boss, sort of. I'm assuming the daughter had some exposure with the team too, and was involved somewhat. But she's calling the shots now, not the mom. So he's also got a new boss to make happy here, and that is always an uncomfortable situation.
For outstanding information and special offerings and promotions, we invite you and encourage you to sign up for our newsletter today simply by going to the website at betmaker.com. And this one might be a crazy one, and I wouldn't envision anything happening till the end of the year, but his in-game coaching is just is insane to me sometimes. Bill O'Brien. But he ends up winning the division last year, and they actually won a playoff game. But there's just, to me, as much as the coaching thing, will it eventually catch up with him? You know, some of the trades and the things they did there, and then the icing on the cake is Hopkins is out of there. I could see at the end of the year. I think O'Brien certainly gets to the end of the year, but if this team flounders, he might have a problem.
Yeah, I mean, you wonder how many lives he has as a coach here. And now they have seemingly survived. They got into the playoffs and got a win even last year in the wild card round against the Bills. You kind of get the feeling here that the Sean Watson's magic has sort of saved them. And but I mean, God help them if something happens to Watson and he gets hurt this year. You brought up the interesting point of the offseason. I mean, the Hopkins trade looks like it could really boomerang on Houston. Now, Hopkins down in Arizona now. I don't think they got commensurate value for him back, and
he'll look like a genius. Listen, he may end up looking like a genius if Johnson comes back to form as a running back, but that's a big if.
That's a big if. And David Johnson's had injury problems, and usually when these running backs start to get hurt, I mean, they're never quite the same. It's over. But maybe Watson is just the X factor here, and he's just so good he gives them a fighting chance all the way. So we will see. They've also had J.J. Watt. He's been in and out of the lineups too. So his status, we'll see. But I would think that O'Brien, especially if some other teams emerge there, Tennessee sort of emerged last year. Indianapolis could certainly bounce back this year, and if so, I think that would be more of a problem for Houston. Yeah, I could see O'Brien by the end of the year. It seems like he doesn't have much downside here, and that Houston's hit its peak under O'Brien. We'll see.
Well, and it's funny. I mean, on the front end of this, and we kind of alluded to it in a previous podcast, these are the guys that I think are in trouble, but there are two guys atop the list for me that I would look at to maybe take that a step to prominence, if that's a way to say it. And to me, they both kind of reside in the AFC, and that's Frank Reich and Sean McDermott. I think are the two coaches primed to really take a step to the forefront. The one thing I would throw at you, I've never understood why. Maybe a guy we should talk about, because I think the world of him, but it seems like Mike Tomlin's always on a hot seat for some reason, or at least his name's out there. I like Mike Tomlin, but a 500 season last year. Who knows what happens with Roethlisberger? But what if the Steelers flail away here?
Well, it's possible. Although I think he set the bar pretty high early in his tenure there, and they had that Super Bowl and what in his second year. So and they got back to the Super Bowl a couple of years later. Working in Tomlin's favor is the fact he's with Pittsburgh, and now 52 seasons they've had 3 coaches, Chuck Noll, Bill Cowher, and Tomlin. So it is the definition of a stable organization. And frankly, I thought Tomlin did one of his better jobs last year. Up until the last couple of weeks, he was working the whole season basically without Big Ben, who got hurt right at the start. And then Mason Rudolph went down, and he's with a rookie free agent. He's going with many games last year, Duck Hodges, and they were still into the penultimate week last year. They were actually in a playoff spot, and the offense just wasn't there at the end because of the quarterback issues. So I think Tomlin could bounce back. I actually think he might be an interesting choice for Coach of the Year. If Big Ben is back, that's a question. I mean, when you're into your 17th year, you're 38 years old, they just reattached 3 tendons to your throwing elbow. That looks precarious to me. But if he is something close to old Big Ben, maybe the Steelers could bounce back. I will tell you the other coach I think who is on the hot seat, Brian, and that's Adam Gase with the Jets. There was time I know it's only his second year, but there were times last year when we thought Gase would be in trouble. The Jets did play better down the stretch, sort of like Denver with Fangio. But there were some front office things. They fired the GM after the draft last year. He and Gase weren't getting along. And the clubhouse had some bumpy moments there. They have invested a lot in Sam Darnold. And there's a lot of people, I'm not sure if Darnold is up to it. Certainly his offensive line was not up to it last year. The Jets went out pretty heavily in free agency and remolded their offensive front. So that was obviously going to be their priority into the offseason because you really have to get Darnold up to speed and you have to help him out and upgrade the offensive line. If the Jets were able to do that, and if Gase was able to do that, that would help him. If he couldn't, and the offensive line still has these issues and Darnold doesn't make progress, I think Gase is in as much trouble could be as much trouble as Patricia or Marrone or any of those other guys. I think he's on these second-year coaches, even more than Fangio. I think Gase is under the hot seat.
All right, talk about a reach. Let me just throw this out there. Bill Cowher is getting inducted into the Hall of Fame. He's only 63 years old. Yeah, there's something telling me, Bruce, in the next 3-4 years, and I know he's got the TV job. There's something telling me I can see this guy pulling a Bill Parcells and come back at some point. I know that's a stretch and maybe a big reach. He just strikes me as one of these guys. I mean, it's in his blood. And he's young. You know, he's 63. I could see him. I really could. I could see him making a comeback in like 3. You know, once he's in, he gets his yellow jacket. Yeah. 2-3 years down. Maybe it's nuts, but there's something just keep telling me Cowher someday is going to give it another kick. Yeah,
and this is the Dick Vermeil thing again. You know, Vermeil was in TV all those years, and now it was a long time between coaching gigs for Vermeil when he came back, and it ended up working pretty good. So I could see that too. The only thing working against that is, from what we understand, and this is kind of up to CBS almost, because they're paying him really well, and he apparently really enjoys that TV gig, and that's. If you can get one of those for a long run, that's one of the best jobs in the world. So he's getting paid really well, and he's enjoying it. But if CBS decides they want to do something else with their studio crew, maybe Cowher looks around and decides, maybe I would like to do this again. It is not there. You're right. You mentioned Parcells. We talked about Vermeil, John Gruden. Bud Wilkinson many years ago had been out of coaching for about 14 years.
It's in their blood, man.
Yeah, it's in their blood, and he came back. So I could see, and especially since he left almost right after the Super Bowl win, and his record was pristine all the way through. He was a real winner, so I could see that.
He won, right? Yeah. But it's like the Marv Levy thing. Marv Levy
too, sure,
long gone, right? And he comes back. My God, he was at least in his 70s when he came back, and they went to 4 Super Bowls.
Yeah.
Talk about somebody older, sharp as a tack. Levy fits that bill. But it's just a crazy topic, but it wouldn't shock me.
No, I wouldn't, and I could perhaps see that down the road. He's still young enough where he could do it, and But it will take a team making a bold move here to hire an old guy, like I said in recent, or older, 60-plus guys getting their first job. I mean, Fangio was the exception to the rule in the NFL, so it'll be different. But he has won in the past, so it's good.
You know, there's a difference, Bruce, because I'm always, and I'm not talking out of both sides of my mouth, but there's stuff, be it hockey, football, and you just see these retreads.
Yeah.
And time again. It's like, well, how many chances does this guy get? Well, it's a different animal when you take a kick at a guy like that all he ever did was win.
Yes, this one
he went out on his terms.
Right. Yeah, he won, and he won big. So it's not it's a little different than a guy like Fangio, who had never been a head coach, or these guys who have been kicked around a lot, but to different jobs. But no, I could see it. I mean, he was certainly a winner, and it wouldn't surprise me. Although, like I said, for this seems to have come up a lot a few years ago, a little bit more, and he just seems to love that TV gig so much. He'll stay there as long as they keep him at CBS, I think.
Speaking of the Hall of Fame, you got the Hall of Fame game with the aforementioned Steelers playing the Cowboys, slated for August 6th, and I really wonder how much in doubt this preseason schedule is going to be. Yeah, that's the first thing, and I would assume they're probably not playing with fans in the stands. They're talking up a 2-game schedule, and they might do something with this Hall of Fame thing and do something different with that too. It's possible. It is, again, the calendar working a little bit in the NFL's favor. It's actually last year, the first game was August 1. We're in a leap year this year, but still it's it's a week later this year, even though August 6 only seems 5 days later. It's the following week. So there's actually a little bit more time. Time is probably good right now just to delay the eventual decision. Even if it's another week, it gives another week to figure things out. That's not that far away. I mean, we're getting to late June now, and we're talking like 6-7 weeks, actual preseason games. So there's a lot to be determined. July is going to be the month where the rubber meets the road with all these sports. They're going to have to make some decisions. But so far, looks pretty good for the NFL. We'll see about the preseason, but the big deal is in September. And the NFL looks good. It's the college game that I've got a little bit more question about. But to the NFL, I think the odds are looking good that they'll get this going. The one thing I would consider, if they go to a 2 preseason schedule, it might be not a bad move right now, is identify several teams with rookie and second-year quarterbacks and maybe fade them now. I mean, because week 1 numbers are out, Bruce, and I would think the less chance that these guys, regardless of the competition they're facing, the young quarterbacks, they need to face those live bullets in the preseason just to gear up for the opener. And I think when the announcement comes that it's a 2-game slate, if that's what it's going to end up being, you watch those numbers move, fading the teams that have young quarterbacks. And it might not be a bad idea to identify those teams right now and say, if it's a 2-game schedule, I can get the best of the number right now. Yeah, and I would look maybe at also teams with new coaches too, and especially since the offseason was jumbled and they didn't have the normal OTAs that they normally would have. And some of these, you got combo new coach, new quarterback, and or rookie quarterback, and that would be a really dicey situation, I think, for all of those teams. One note, I mean, a lot of NFL people will tell you in preseason, in the summer, a lot of teams believe it's the joint workouts with other teams that they have and the scrimmaging they're in, which is a little bit more important than the games actually in preseason. So I'd also watch that, but I don't know the way things are set up now. Are they going to have these? It doesn't seem like they would have these teams together in training camp either. Oh, no. You know what, Bruce? Yeah. I think, honestly, I mean, that's a great point you bring up, that these teams get sick of beating up on each other. Yeah. And actually, that's a betting angle, right? When these teams practice together all week and play at the end of the week, the game's a throwaway because they got all the work done during practices. But that's a great point. I think that ship has sailed. There is no way that a team is going to expose themselves to banging around day after day after day before the season starts with this virus going around. I can't see anybody doing that.
I think you're right, and that's another thing here about the preseason, and that's been sort of the unknown thing about preseason is that actually a lot of these teams take those scrimmages with other teams more seriously, and that's where they get in a lot more of the work than the actual preseason games. But if you throw that out this year, and it's a limited preseason slate, boy, I'm telling you, these teams with the new quarterbacks, like you said, or the new coaches, like I said, this puts them under more pressure. So you may have a point there about fading some of those teams in the early season. They're just not going to have that much time together, and it's something I think we have to watch.
I mean, you look at it right now. I mean, Burrow may end up being just that good, but the Chargers are laying 3 at Cincinnati in week 1. They knocked that down to a 2 preseason game slate. What are you talking? Tyrod Taylor on the road laying more than a field goal. I don't know if that one is one, but I mean, Burrow's almost a cinch, wouldn't you think, to start?
Yes. Yeah, they've kind of cleared the way for him. Dalton's now in Dallas. So I think they've cleared the way for him. Carolina, now they have a quarterback with some experience in Bridgewater, but new system, new coach. And again, they've had no time, unless whatever Bridgewater's been doing on his own with some of the receivers at Carolina, but everything is new there. And they've had no time as a team to put anything together. Not only everything new, I mean, this is Matt Rule's coming in from the college ranks, and he's got some college coaches with him there too. So it's total adjustment for Carolina. And you wonder about the Raiders going back there for the opener, only 1.5, at least. And it's the Raiders have also had an off season. On top of everything else, they're moving cities here, so maybe they're not the best example. But the teams like that, there's going to be a lot more mystery about some of these teams with new quarterbacks and new coaches that haven't had the time to get used to it. So definitely.
It's funny. It's fun just looking at some of the week 1 lines. And the one that sticks out to me, the Lions at home laying 2 to the Bears. I mean, they get the draft. They get Okudah. They get a running back in Swift. Their draft looked pretty good, and they came out of the gate quickly last year. And as long as Stafford's upright in the beginning, that actually looks like a bad number to me. It
could be. I'll tell you the one that I'm still a little perplexed about a bit. Dallas laying points at the Rams. That's the first Sunday night game if the schedule sticks like this, and the new stadium for the Rams. And I know Dallas did beat the Rams pretty heavy toward the end of last season. The Rams have had some changes in the offseason. But again, Dallas favored on the road here. I mean, the hype is, again, ahead of the reality here for Dallas. I know there's a new coach there, too, in McCarthy. Last time we saw him, though, he had sort of burned that whole thing down in Green Bay. And the thought still persists to me that Jerry might think this team, the roster is closer to Super Bowl caliber than it really is. And you've got Dallas laying points on the road. I just don't know about that.
Well, and then finally, right, Prescott gets the franchise tag.
Yeah.
And what does that tell you? That tells you they've got to find doubts about him.
Yes. And I knew, we can't feel bad for Dak. I mean, this is getting a lot of money this year. It's sort of like Cousins with the Redskins. He's on the franchise, but he's getting paid very well. But yeah, before they're going to commit, to 4 or so more years, Jerry wants to see another year with Dak. And I've long maintained Dak is good. He's not great. The stats are kind of hollow with him, how he sequences his stats. The game with the Bears last year was the greatest example. At the end of the night, Dak's stats looked okay, but for most of the game they didn't, and he was piling up a lot of numbers late in garbage time. That game, the Philadelphia game, the penultimate game last year, when everything was on the line there, they had to rise the occasion. Once again, Dallas didn't. And, so I have questions about the Dak too, and so did Jerry. So I agree. He was the perfect franchise tag guy. But no, they're not convinced about him long term. So pressure's on Dak this year too, especially with the coach. He doesn't have Garrett to fall back on as an excuse anymore. So I think that's an overreaction, though, the opening number against the Rams. I don't think Dallas should be favored.
Yeah, wrap it up with this, only because he did it to himself. If I was looking for an analogy, Dak Prescott is certainly more chicken noodle soup than lobster bisque.
There you go. There you go.
For Bruce Marshall from the Gold Sheet, I'm Brian Blessing. Always fun talking NFL.
Betmaker, let's make some money tonight.
Well, that's the Betmaker Show for now. We publish multiple times each week. We'd like to thank you for listening, and if you liked what you heard, please take a moment to leave a rating and review, or subscribe to our show feed, or share our show with a friend or two and help us grow the show. We very much appreciate it. Visit us on the web at betmaker.com. And reminder to sign up for the newsletter. Thanks to our engineer, Darren Vandermolen, and producer, Mike Gallivan. The Betmaker Show is a production of Cardinal Marketing Incorporated. Betmaker is a registered trademark. Any rebroadcast, reproduction, or other use of this content without the express written consent of Cardinal Marketing Incorporated is strictly prohibited.
The handicapping and sports odds information contained on this podcast is for entertainment purposes only. Please confirm the wagering regulations in your jurisdiction, as they vary from state to state, province to province, and country to country. Using this information to contravene any law or statute is prohibited. The podcast is not associated with, nor is it endorsed by any professional or collegiate league, association, or team. This podcast does not target and is not intended for an audience under the age of 18. If you think that you have a gambling addiction, stop this podcast now and please seek help.
Gambling and betting on sports is a form of entertainment and should be about having a good time. But when done excessively, it may negatively affect other areas of a person's life, such as their physical and mental health, school or work performance, finances, and or interpersonal relationships. At Betmaker.com and the Betmaker Show, we're concerned about the addiction that gambling may cause, and for this reason, we encourage everyone to practice responsible gambling, an approach to gambling that helps you ensure that it remains an enjoyable activity. Here are the main principles of responsible gambling. Don't think of gambling as a way to make money. Always gamble with money that you can afford to lose. Set limits and stick to them. Never chase losses. Don't gamble when you're depressed or upset, and create a healthy balance. Always be aware of how much time you spend gambling or thinking about gambling. And do not allow gambling to cause you to miss out on time with family and friends or time spent on other activities you enjoy. By following these guidelines, gambling can be a good time and great entertainment. If you feel at any time that your gambling is taking away from important areas of your life, is causing you stress or depression, or is leading to financial losses that are beyond your control, please reach out for help. Learn more at responsiblegambling.org.